So yeah, this is kind of where it all started. My first instance of this kind of content was a commentary on King Godverse. And really, King Godverse is probably the best example to show the sheer insanity of some of these characters. Again, it's literally the character that made me realize all this insanity to begin with. So in this video, which is probably going to be up to an hour long, we'll be covering Legacy King Godverse again, but this time with a new perspective that I've gained from my previous Powerscaling videos. I'm Vector Graphics, and it's time to dive into the granddaddy of overpowered characters, Legacy King Godverse. You saw the trailer, well, hopefully you saw the trailer. If you saw the trailer, you can tell that this is gonna be a long one. So let's get started. And immediately, what the heck? Omni-transcendent mighty scepter of the Beyonder God King? So immediately, we know this guy's a Beyonder God King. Also, we know that he has an omni-transcendent mighty scepter. And this author seems really intent on letting us know that this is a mighty scepter. Not just any old kind of scepter, a mighty scepter. Additionally, there's the weird bad grammar and the fact that these abilities are referred to in first person at all. Like, if you want to be creepy and meta, sure, but like, why? Both of these can be explained, however, by going back in time. No, I'm serious. If we look at some of the oldest wiki revisions of the page, we can see what this ability used to be. That's where all the issues come from. This is a case of what I like to call find and replace-itis, which is more of a King Godverse specific phenomenon where things are just find and replaced with other supposedly more powerful descriptions without changing the context around it. Here we can see that Spear was replaced with Mighty Scepter and that King Godverse was replaced with Eye. But that still doesn't excuse how freaking deranged all this is. Spear or Scepter alike, infinite coefficient beyond our incomprehensible understanding is just... what the heck? So now we have a new ability and a new problem with power scaling. This has to do with the fact that either the word impossible is missing an otherwise qualifier that would make this sentence make sense semantically, what I like to call the otherwise problem, or what I believe to be the more likely explanation of the two, that these words like impossible and unkillable don't refer to their actual meanings, but more so labels. Something that is described as impossible, someone that is described as unkillable. So it's really a degree of bypassing, and we'll get into bypassing. Don't worry about it. And even with all of this, the ability still doesn't really clarify how it actually works. Like, is King Godverse working like a magical, like you have to do this sort of, magical coercion type thing, or is he just granting abilities? I'd assume based on the name that it's the former, but the way it's described sounds like it's more the latter. On to the next ability, again with the lack of clarification, what does being the god of something even mean? That is pretty much just a mythological concept. It could be, like, embodying everything in the universe. He says, I am all here. But I don't trust these people to know how embodiment works, given they seem to throw around the word at random in other cases. And again, what does Beyonder God mean exactly? Anyway, it's nice that we have some of these shorter abilities. Let's hope the next few don't get any more stupid. Welp, I shouldn't have said anything. What is this fandom's obsession with buttons? In case you don't know, in the game Undertale, you take actions in battles using a menu that predictably has buttons. A large chunk of the early fandom, for some reason, decided to take this to its extreme and assume the buttons are actual in-universe things. When, like, they're clearly not. The character who we see interacting with them, Sans, explicitly has some kind of meta-awareness. But here we see this random ability getting in the form of a button. Why? I believe this to be due to Underverse, a fan animation series that, due to the aforementioned fandom headcanon, prominently features a button called Overwrite with similar abilities. Geez, I'm just going button right now. There are a couple smaller complaints I have about this ability, like, what does before mean, who is CC? What's the definition of God here? But the button thing was the main thing I wanted to bring up in regards to this ability. So, I guess now it's time to get to the main course. True, boundless, God, flawless, transcendent transfictional omnipotence. This ability is the namesake of this entire series. I've pretty much memorized it. I am clearly God of the Omnipotent for all/infinity. I have no boundaries or limitation. I am the giver of the true concepts of omnipotence, that the truly, supremely, almighty, truly invincible, and above all OP gods being all beyond all. And I am the embodiment of the omnipotence. I can literally do anything and everything in absolute, eternal, total, boundless, transfiction levels and beyond. I don't need any Senki. I can transcend everything, anything, and nothing in large terms. I usually don't try too hard. I always use my omnipotent. You may be thinking, oh, Vector's just used the stone paradox to discredit his ability. I've seen this before. But actually, no. You see, the stone paradox has been debunked. You see, the stone paradox is basically asking, can King Godverse create a stone that he can't lift? Supposedly, either answer to this question leads to the conclusion that King Godverse is not omnipotent. But there's a sneaky assumption here, which is the assumption that omnipotence is an intrinsic property. To explain what I mean, let's imagine an abstracted universe with only two actions that can be done. Let's call them A and B. Now, in this universe, an omnipotent being can do both A and B, though it's more accurate and meaningful to say that any being that can do both A and B is omnipotent. So let's say that doing B results in the possibility of a new action, which we'll call C. Now, our previously omnipotent beings with ability set A, B are no longer omnipotent. A being's ability to do anything depends entirely on what anything is. And that's what the setup of the stone paradox fails to realize. That is basically asking, can an omnipotent being cause itself to no longer be omnipotent? To which the answer is a resounding yes. Stone paradox tangent aside, still don't use omnipotence in your characters, it makes story writing ass. And also, I doubt this is even omnipotence under traditional definition, for the same reason as the unkillable stuff from before. It's essentially just omnipotence as a label for power scaling purposes. And last but not least for this ability, what the heck does true boundless god flawless transcendent transfictional mean? Okay, I was gonna comment on the no one here being an otherwise problem, but like, I love that you can read this ability as I know nothing. This person focused so much on listing off their LA bullshit that they didn't even stop to check what they had just written. Anyway, onto the actual problem with this ability that I was going to mention before I got distracted. The fricking word transcending. Transcendent, transcend, transcends, all of those forms of the word. I wish that word was erased from all of these power scalers' conception of the English language. It's again just so unclear what it means here, or anywhere else to be honest. So this omnipresent ability starts out fine, in fact I stand omnipresent, but then it goes into this weird time shenanigan, like, I can only assume that this takes place in meta time, but why? This character isn't pretending to be weirdly diegetic like Infinity Code is. And if he isn't in meta time, then there's a bit of a causality issue. That is, if you characterize time paradoxes as fundamental nature of the world that makes time travel impossible, instead of arbitrary things that our universe doesn't allow, thus explaining why time travel is impossible. Which, given how common time paradoxes are as a plot point, this author would probably do the former. Other than that, though, this is just asymmetric possible omnipresence, which I'm fine with. You know what I'm not fine with? This absolute wall of text. Why have many questions here? This ability has more jargon than a frickin' corporate meeting. All the random capitalized stuff seems to be from some sort of power scaling wiki, which I hate. And oh boy, it has some bad embodiments. So what this embodiment thing I keep commenting on is that these power scalers use the word embodiment for some vague, unclear purpose. Said purpose generally not being the dictionary definition of embodiment. Or if it is, they do a very bad job at actually expressing that. I know this because I'm writing a setting with gods that actually are embodiments of their respective domains. As in, they're literally a consciousness and perspective given to the natural phenomenon they're the god of. So seeing the term used this way is just disappointing. Next ability. Remember when I said we were going to talk about bypassing? Well, here it is. Now, when I first read this ability, I was stupid, so I didn't understand it. But now I'm not stupid, so I understand what's going on here. Essentially, bypassing is the power scaler jargon way of saying, I'm immune to that. You know, that thing that play-fighting kids do when they want to be annoying. And you know, maybe I am a little bit stupid here, because singularity means like 3 different things and I'm not sure which one the author meant here. So it's obvious that this is an ability meant for the specific context of power scaling and nothing else. This is an ability you would see used in a story. It's there specifically so that when the author does matchups with this character, they can just cite this ability and say, haha, I win. Now on to the next ability. Over true, absolute flawless, this is just saying the literal same thing as before. But stepping through this and pointing out all the weird things I find, other than all of it, random first-person comment. Why specifically on this ability and not another? Unfortunately, that's not how logic works. Like, I keep seeing these abilities saying logic doesn't apply to them, but like, I feel like that's just specifically an attempt to thwart people like me. Of course, it doesn't work because I'm making this video, just thought it would be something to point out. This weird role of Destroyer is another Undertale fandom specific thing, having to do with destroying AUs, which in a generalized model of timelines is not possible. Unless you invoke a sense of metatime, but most people don't. Wow, we're 10 minutes into the video and we've only covered 10 abilities. I'd better get moving. So now we get to the other hallmark of this power scaling focus mentality, arsenal abilities. Arsenal abilities are basically this, where it says, I have every power you can think of, every OC power, every whatever. Found the Polychism at least. Or technically it's called Polysomatism now, but anyway, I'd like to notice that this says complete instead of complete, and it's said that for as long as the ability has existed, so just kind of funny that nobody corrected that in that entire time. Though this old version of the ability does highlight something else I want to point out, which is the exists and non-exist thing, which is just unnecessary. If he has it, then it necessarily exists, so there is just no reason to put this. And wow, this character keeps giving me new stuff to talk about. First of all, I did it once, I'll do it again. The Universe tier wrap. Universe, Chronoverse, Omniverse, Megaverse, Xenoverse, Hyperverse, Multiverse, Metaverse. I'll stop now. I don't even think one can come up with an actual way to define these, without just generalizing it to an arbitrary number of tiers, like with the strata, which is a fine thing to do, but I'm pretty sure it's not what these people are going for. Just have Universe, Multiverse, and Omniverse and call it a day. But also, what is this equal to an avatar stuff? An avatar of what? A polysomatic being? That doesn't really make sense, given he is an actual full person and not just a body. And if they mean creator self-inserts, then why do those have a defined power level? My self-insert JW literally has negative abilities. Though to be fair, I did make this ability set on purpose to sort of sabotage the traditional avatar mindset that seems to be on Godverse, but none of that invalidates it as a self-inserts ability set, so I've been made aware of what authority means in this context, and it's essentially bypassing, but why you use authority to mean that? It makes it look like this Shank is just following some sort of social custom despite being a multiversal god. Okay, yeah, he has existed forever. He didn't have a beginning or whatever. I can see that existing in some cosmology. Doesn't even conflict with anything in the multiverse. And okay, yeah, he's unkillable. That isn't much of an achievement even for characters that aren't designed for power scaling, which is something that a lot of people don't seem to get due to the fighting-focused nature of these kinds of characters. One thing I will say is that this isn't really an ability, but other than that, it's nice to have an oasis of things that actually kind of make some sense in this massive page of bullclunk. But wait, hold on, why is it associated with omnipotence? Speaking of which, this is just omnipotence again. You can make a god out of a worm. With some definitions of god, so can anyone with a good enough charisma. Moving on, we get to this ability. As you can see, it says, I can create any spouse without limits. It has said this for the entire time the ability has existed, and this is the only place the word spouse is referenced on the wiki at all. Now, in case you don't know, spouse is the English word for a person someone is married to. So, what the heck does the author mean by this statement? Did they mean to use another word instead of spouse? Did they mean spouse and just use that as a very weird example of the And here's where find and replace itis can actually get confusing. Because the pronoun he here refers to King Godverse, but right here it looks like it refers to the spouse, so anyway, after this ability, we get to the potences. The potences are a set of 5 abilities, all distinguished by having potence in the name. They are rather similar, but I still have things to say about each one individually, so let's get started. Come on, author! Otherwise inaccessible. Otherwise impossible. How is this so hard? And apparently his attacks only work on himself, which is a pretty big weakness for a character supposed to be this powerful. And also contradicts what is said previously about omnipotence. This is just omnipotence, but also, this is pretty much just complete morphological freedom. Perfection is poorly defined, but I won't go too hard on that because this is referring to an application that he uses the ability for, so at least there is a problem with this ability, the logic thing from before. That is, just omnipotence again! Yay! You totally had to say the same ability 3 separate times! Okay, this one is just ridiculous. Ah yes, he has elementum potence. What is meant by elements here? Does he mean like classical elements like earth, fire, etc., or does he mean actual periodic elements from chemistry? I mean, it probably applies to both given the LA here, but well, I don't know if those count as omni-elements, so anyway, this one isn't technically a potence, it's a potence. Magic is poorly defined. Moving on. Wow, Omniarch. Finally a word that's actually reasonably derived here. Though it does make me wonder what ruling stuff means. Like, for all I know, this is just like a social status or whatever. It's not like an actual ability or anything. The second part of the text does clarify it as being like mind control and whatnot, but like, why not have that be the ability's name and first description? Why characterize it as this abstract notion of rulership? And again, the silly extraneous existence, non-existence thing. I can't see a reason why non-existence would end up used as a label in Powerscaling. Though then again, I did just read a character that claimed to be non-existent somehow while actually existing, so... Look, you already said this before. He's immune to everything, so why specify it again? What does Omnilock mean? It doesn't ever clarify other than that he's, like, immune to stuff. Like, that's what he already is, though, so what does Omnilock add here? The other thing I'll mention here is the weird cosmological trap of, like, King Godverse resides outside of everything, all of this stuff. King Godverse still uses the misspelling of sense, which is weird. Anyway, it makes no sense with a C, because it's really hard to characterize, and also it's really poorly defined what residing outside of all of this stuff means. That's not how omnipotence works. Invincibility is not an infinite emptiness. That actually kind of reminds me of these bull Googology values. Though actually, I want to go on a tangent about those real quick, because those are really just the same thing as Powerscaling. I'd assume they're made by the same kinds of people. This next ability is an example of why Powerscaling-centric character building can lead to a literally unusable character. According to this ability, King Godverse, willingly or unwillingly, ignores everything, meaning that he does not take any input whatsoever, and thus does not even have a perspective. Thus, I can confidently say that King Godverse is not a character. So one thing the Undertale fandom is known for is these creation and destruction roles, and the idea that a conscious being needs to be behind the creation and destruction of universes. That's reflected here, but with, all verses, for some reason, which, by the way, are supposedly distinct from Omniverses. That's just the creation power again, but rephrased to make it sound cooler and also look like one of his previous abilities again. Yay! So why those four specific things? Science, magic, divinity, philosophy? I'm sure it's some kind of cosmology thing, but not all universes follow that. So to most universes, this really just looks like four random concepts that are somehow acting as one single united force or whatever. Remember how I said I wasn't going to go too hard on perfection being poorly defined? Well, now I am! You see, perfection can only be defined relative to something. A stone cube with a nick in it isn't a perfect stone cube, but it is a perfect stone cube with a nick in it. But here perfection is being treated as some kind of absolute measure, when it's not. This is clearly just some power scaling kind of thing to be superlative, but still, makes it even worse, to be honest. So, here's the narrative assumption. That is, the assumption that any fictional universe, by nature of being fictional, has to follow some sort of narrative as an inherent part of its cosmology. And well, that's not how EUC works, so it shouldn't apply. But seriously, I see this so commonly. It's like if people assume that because Undertale is a game, all Undertale EUs need to run on code or something. Oh wait. So this is technically a continuation of the previous ability, but I've listed it on its own for convenience and because it's already barely fitting on the screen with how zoomed out it is. And even this is still pretty much 11 abilities in one, so let's get started. Otherwise impossible. Normal people can already do this. That's poorly defined and also out of place. I know that's going to lead to just more power scaling labels. Ah yes, he's omnipotent. What the heck is AA? If this is what the authors of this character thinks narratives focus on, then that explains a lot. Why is this called that? What if he says a logical contradiction? Again, this is just an extensive creation power. And what does this mean, and more importantly, how is it even an ability? So now begins an interesting little subsection of the ability list, characterized mainly by the use of quotation marks in the ability names and a very different style of language compared to the rest of the page. And, well, I'm kind of having trouble understanding this. Okay, well, what this ability is basically saying is saying that he has every possible ability you could think of or not, which is basically what a lot of these things are saying. But instead of just saying omnipotence, this does it in a really power-scaling, jargon-heavy way, which seems overly designed for matchups rather than actual character design, so there's that. The ability also contains this subsection, which supposedly, lists every single type of ability King Godverse has. And it's, excessively detailed in a really weird way, where it, lists out every single possible case that it can apply to. Which I believe is another artifact of the labelization of power scaling. After all, character A with every ability can't have character B's ability if character B transcends the concept of every, which, by the way, is an objectively stupid idea. So, first of all, what is this comment from King Godverse about? Do you really think I was standing in a confined space? What does that have to do with the ability? Also, this conflicts with every Undertale AU which has characters which are self-identified gods. It literally conflicts with Undertale. Go ahead, ask the AU creator, or whatever AU you're in, is your god character puppeted by some stupid Omni overlord? No, of course they're not. Going with the common assumption on these wikis that creators refers to the real-life creators of Undertale content, this means that King Godverse has committed several real-world murders, which is dumb. And also, why do real creators end up having such a big role in these AUs anyway? These usually aren't something like small talk where there's an actual justification for that, so what's going on? Mysware must really like the word impossible here, because it appears like 5 different times in this ability. No, 6! None of which have an otherwise next to them. This ability, which is a verbose description of omniparchy, but you see that square bracketed text that says Grandfather LA? Well, that's hiding this. I don't really know what to say about this. This behemoth of a list, which I call the Grandfather LA, seemingly contains every single possible thing the author could think of for something that this ability could apply to. A full reading of it will be available in the description. And now what I'm wondering is, why? Why couldn't the author have just done something else, like this? I don't see any particular power scaling labels that would make this unsatisfactory in the power scaler's eye, but like, surely the author doesn't agree with something here, otherwise they would have just used this description. And I'm not even done with the issues with this ability yet. Oh no. We have got 2 more things to talk about here. Remember when I compared power scaling to that fake Googology wiki with the stupid numbers? Well, this clause here that I've highlighted is basically the equivalent of saying, my number is the highest number you can think of plus 1. It's increasingly obvious now that this is just a reflection of kids play fighting, but on a wiki instead of in a playground. And am I getting deja vu? Because I swear I've seen this little sentence at the end of some other abilities. Aha! There it is! And there it is again all the way back here. I've been complaining about this author saying the same thing like 3 different times before, but there he's paraphrasing using different ideas to get the same basic point across. Here, he literally just copy-pasted the same sentence to 3 different abilities. What the heck? How to flunk out of making sense class on your first day. Make 2 contradicting statements within the same sentence. Apparently, according to this ability, comparing a character's power levels with King Godverse immediately makes the character King Godverse's puppet with an omega low hypoversal minus power level. Okay, let's test this out. VRSS is stronger than King Godverse. VRSS is still stronger than King Godverse. Nope, didn't work. I'm the creator of VRSS, by the way, so I have authority on the character. Okay. How do you even make an ability based on such weird claims to being transfictional that it can be invalidated literally just by writing it down? This ability is entirely built on the word absorb, which is poorly defined to say the least. That's about all I have for this one. Moving on. Lol, these fake numbers. Infinity, 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 plus, 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 plus. And the oddity with being a ruler is back! Apparently being a true king requires you to have infinitely superior powers of all entities' powers. The other complaint I have with this ability is the other brush with, like, the weird superlative statements that are very easy to violate just by making new characters. And so, as a rule, should be avoided. Especially in a collaborative fiction like this. So, what does puppet refer to here? Puppet Master here seems to be like a distinct class of being with like a base ability set and whatnot. Something like this. But if this was established, why not just say Puppet Master base abilities instead of using this whole paragraph for it? And also, what does high omni transient infinity level mean? To be honest, having these kinds of power levels is kind of flawed to begin with. because it simplifies the ability set of the character down to just this linear thing that can be compared, which is kind of reductivist even for me. Particularly overpowered characters do converge on similar power sets, but it's kind of pointless to compare those anyway, so... Oh right, I guess I should talk about this as well. The word godity is one I've seen a lot in Godverse, and I have no clue what it means. My best guess is that it refers to being a god in terms of power levels, as opposed to any other factors that may play into a definition of god. Hence why I've called this power set godity base abilities. Anyway, moving on. Okay, wait, does this ability say in short, and then go on to have most of the ability be the short version so that it's actually longer than the non-shortened version? This feels like someone was trying to fill a word count for an essay. So what the heck are these rules of eternity and concept? And also, what's the bottom of all existence? The physical bottom with respect to some reference point? The metaphorical bottom in some cosmology that doesn't apply universally? Is there some character named All Existence whose butt will be destroyed by this ability? That is as possible as any of these other scenarios, since you don't clarify what bottom means. Wait, so this is just Omniparchy as well? Why'd you need that other ability with the grandfather LA? Everything that other ability has is gotten across just by this. Oh right, these people have no clue what embodiment means. And these people have no clue what embodiment means. And what's with this list? What's with this list of the unimaginable, impossible, non-existent, why? Why not, what? It's just an LA combined with that weird non-existent thing from before. Grammatical errors aside, maybe these people do actually know what embodiment means, but I still highly doubt they're actually using it correctly. That is, they aren't writing this character as if he has Omniparchy. That is, if they're writing the character at all, which... Well, okay, he does have an appearance and personality section, though they're just cliché, so... Okay, first of all, what is this box? Where did this box come from? Why is everything contained in a box? That cosmology does not apply universally, again! Other than the weird transfictional stuff, I think this is the first time I've seen one of these abilities literally lie, though I've gone through like 40 of them, so I don't remember fully. Like, has this person read anything on the most well-known monotheistic deity? Or even the second most well-known monotheistic deity? Geez, people, it's not that hard. And if verses doesn't mean universes here, then, okay, fine. You may think it's cheating, but this is just as valid as the other two deities I mentioned, it's just not followed by any real-world religion. Didn't we literally already bring up this stuff about eternity before, and with this kind of language? While the use of embodiment here is questionable, so are all the uses of embodiment here. Otherwise, this ability, it's hardly an ability, is it, is completely fine. Okay, wait, what? You just said that monotheistic deities couldn't create verses and that King Godverse could create verses, but here it says King Godverse is a monotheistic deity. Nice job, you contradicted yourself on the very next ability. I don't think Gestalt means what they think it means, or they're just using it weirdly for just power scaling purposes. Also, how is ghost physiology well defined at all? Ghosts are like the one type of being whose physiology is the least consistent across the universes. We've already discussed this trick. People are trying to thwart my attempts to debunk their overpowered abilities just by saying that logic doesn't apply. Here's a hint. That's not how logic works. Not at all. What is illogical is that you decide to say this 2 different times in 2 different ways in this ability section. Like, you really wanted to drive the point home that logic doesn't apply, a point that doesn't really matter. Like, do you actually mean you're hand-waving it? In that case, just say you're hand-waving it. I may still comment on how doing that is rather silly, but I won't comment on how not transcending the rules of logic or whatever. On the other side of things, this ability's name sounds like an Everywhere at the End of Time song. So what I believe is happening here, and with the other funky hyperreal stuff, is that the creator is trying to sort of squash out any idea of another person being able to beat King Godverse, which is like, why? Why do you care about this so much? Just make it so that King Godverse is the strongest being in your AU. And not only that, but they literally admit that that's what they're doing. King Godverse is power wanked. It literally says it right here. And again with the superlative statements that like make it really easy to invalidate this ability just by writing another character. What? This isn't even an ability. It says nowhere how these infinity concepts of all relate to King Godverse in any fashion. Are they something he has? Are they something he can make? Are they something that somehow makes him powerful in some way? Are they another thing he supposedly embodies? What's going on here? This ability is weird, transcendent, hyperreal bullshit that I've already covered. That is, these words like above and beyond are just really poorly defined. Why the heck is dualism mentioned here? What even is that? Here's that box again. And in general, this ability is just a mess. Oh wow, we finally reached reality manipulation. It's safe to say he has the godity-based abilities now, if Omnipotence didn't already cover that. And why are all these things qualified with boundless god, transcendent, high god, whatever? Why? And what is the alpha reality? It's just mentioned, but like, it's not actually given a description? And this character doesn't have a backstory section to explain what the alpha reality is, so... And again, this is just a special case of his reality manipulation, which is just a special case of his omnipotence. It seems other uses of transcendence were just an appetizer for this main course of what? Unless you have a stratum-based cosmology, which, again, not all universes have, there's pretty much no clearly defined meaning to any of this. And that's why I hate the word transcendence in these power scaling things. It's just never clear at all what is even meant by it. It seems to just be this vague sense of being beyond stuff that power scalers use as excuses. Omnipresence with observation. Nah, I'm not gonna do the multiverse rap again. I could, but then I would just be making a mistake as this author here, making the character's abilities super repetitive. Just gonna come to all this Xenoverse, Omniverse, and whatever all that is stupid. And again, doesn't apply to all cosmology. At least we get a nice concise way to refer to them all. Omnisphere. This ability is a case of what I like to call discrete abilities. That is, the idea that the abilities of a character are precisely those outlined by the ability section on the page, instead of being generalizable from few base capabilities. This model of abilities is usually denoted with the phrase, "this ability allows," in ability lists. The thing is, it's really hard to write stories around, and like, it just makes no sense. It makes much less sense for a character to be able to do these specific things than to have a general power set that can be applied to specific situations. This ability references the discrete ability model much more obscurely, just by referencing King Godverse having access to distinct abilities with a given qualifier. And also, transfictional seems to be described as being able to influence the real world instead of just like the fictional worlds. But that's not how fictional characters work, is the thing. At least not in the way that they are describing here. This is straight up an ability that can just never be expressed. This is another absorb-based ability, which is, again, really hard to describe since I don't know what the heck absorb means in this case. It just says absorb. It doesn't elaborate on what this absorbing is. Yes. Yes, he can. What does absolute refer to here? It says the complete unchanging, but he's able to manipulate it, so unchanging doesn't apply. And absolute as a power scaling level is, I especially don't know. Ah yes, omni manipulation, absolute manipulation, and absolute force manipulation. Awesome ability names, author. And again with the special case abilities, which are again especially compounded because of the omnipotence, meaning these abilities are actually 2 levels of special casing deep. And here it is, the code ability. I touched on this before, but Undertale AUs tend to make the assumption that every world is fundamentally based on code, or at least these overpowered power scaling AUs, which derive that from Alphatale, a self-enclosed multiverse with that as part of its cosmology. And I get Undertale is like a self-aware game and whatnot, but it can just as easily be analyzed that the game itself is sort of the access point between the Undertale world and the real physical world. And this is supported by canon, where Deltarune, Undertale's sister game, is treated as a survey program. So again, this ability does not apply to all cosmologies. And this code thing is an assumption that even the modern Godverse wiki makes. Like, why? And the code is hardly even treated like code usually as well. At least when I have coded beings, I actually assign them proper file structures and whatnot. Purify is poorly defined, even more poorly defined than perfect is. Moving on. More copy pasta sentences at the end of things. And yeah, this ability is just, my number is the biggest number you can think of plus 1-ism. Again, that is not how fiction works. Like, sure, he can, like, break the fourth wall and say these abilities in the first person, but he can just... What is this? I know the website of who's reading this. Yeah? So? Fourth wall awareness is not the flex you think it is, especially in an Undertale AU context. My guesser has fourth wall awareness of a very similar nature, though without the unfounded claims, and is just a normal guy otherwise. Oh wow, it's Omniparky for the third time! Like, seriously, was this creator asked for a school assignment to come up with 5 different ways to describe Omniparky? 1, what eyes? He's possibly asomatic. And 2, finally we have an actual attack here. Even if it's a stupid wanked attack, it's still an attack. Which, to be honest, highlights this great ability principle even more. And what about the timeline where it didn't destroy 10 universes, or multiverses or whatever? You can't permanently erase stuff from fiction, the internet always remembers. And why isn't this the same ability as the previous one? And this ability makes no sense whatsoever. Though I guess that's kind of the point. And what the heck is this ability? It just says TBA. They couldn't spend the time to write this ability, but they could spend the time to write the frickin' grandfather LA? Like, it's called King's Totality Glory Eyes, so I can only assume there's some possibility of it violating him possibly being asomatic, but I just don't know, since the author never took the time to finish this ability, and this ability in particular. So, if you paid attention to the trailer, you may notice that this is the final ability listed there, but oh, it's nowhere near King Godverse's final ability. We're only at the halfway mark. Indeed, we're only 30 minutes into this video that I said was going to be an hour long, so buckle in everybody, let's get ready for the second half of King Godverse's abilities. Though this half will probably be shorter, as the abilities in the second half tend to be shorter, and of course I'll have less to say about them since I've already covered a lot of stuff and can just reference previous parts of the video. So this ability actually makes sense for like more medium power characters, but like, for characters who are intended to be as powerful as King Godverse is, it's just kind of extraneous in a way. Like, that's a cool superpower, being able to read your opponent's mind, actions, whatever like that. Yeah, sure, cool, but like, that's the kind of ability you'd list along with phylacteric polysomatism. Not true boundless, god flawless, transcendent, omni ultra. First of all, a being that is impossible to beat at what? Checkers? Chess? You need to specify. Also, this ability literally just says the same thing 3 different times, and it still doesn't clarify what advantage means. Like, is it D&D advantage? Is there some power scaling jargon I don't know about? What is this? Okay. Other than what counts as cosmic, which doesn't matter because he has omnipotence, I don't really see any problems with this. Of course, other than that it's a subset of his omnipotence. But I see that problem for all of these abilities, so I don't bring it up. And what the heck is a void? I know it's an established construct in Undertale AU space, but what precisely is it? You may think the all forms of covers the author's ass here, but no it doesn't. Like, I've seen the void, the anti-void, does the mainframe count as a void? What about the Bootes void? Though I guess that would fall into the cosmic manipulation from before. This is just more anti-TBGF measures. Moving on. Well, actually not moving on, because I want to point out the whole thing with, oh, we add periods after each letter to make it sound like an acronym, so it's more edgy. And yes, edginess is the intent here. This has happened before with the fricking Mercy Blasters. Like, what the heck is Amalgamite? So now we get to the assumption of narrative again, I guess. Well, just in general, the assumptions that destinies and fates are something that can apply universally. Wow, so someone needs to arrange an assassination now for them to lose all their abilities and whatever? From what I last read, it just took mentioning them in a page to compare power. Also, oh no, it really sucks that I can't use any of my abilities. And here, the author took totally the best option when met with the complaint that their ability is poorly defined. Just hang a lampshade on it! Even this author doesn't know what is meant by pataphysics here. I mean, at least they're acknowledging the problem, which is at least a start, so... Though more likely they're not, and it's more just power scaling gibberish, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. But also, if he can control it, then he can clearly know about it, so it's not unknowable or unknown. So this is another double subset, this time being of reality manipulation. But also, molecular powers here is a link to a power listing wiki. Awesome! Said power listing wiki contains a nightmarish compilation of discrete ability nonsense. And on the topic, I feel like my ultimate issue with discrete abilities is the whole concept of using abilities to do stuff. To me, the ultimate goal of an ability list is to be description, not a definition of specific powers that a character can use. I feel like that's what more recent power scaling stuff is going for with feats and whatnot. It's just that it's still obviously a discrete ability-based framework, so it doesn't end up working out that well. In short, a character doesn't use an ability to do something. The fact that that character can do that thing is described by the ability. This is just more anti-TBGF measures, which are stupid. Also, I feel like illogic was added in a later draft, and yes, in fact it was, which actually gives me a bit of insight into the way these opposition things work. It's the author sort of covering their ass in a way. To be honest, a less bloated version of this ability I'd agree with. A powerful character has extrasensory perception powers? Yeah, sure. At least it's one step further from the overly anthropomorphic, overpowered characters we see a lot. But the fact remains that this ability is itself very bloated with omnipotent and transcendent and whatnot, so that is what ruins it for me. Also, wouldn't this itself end up being a kind of sense, violating the whole premise of extrasensory? I guess it's just a common phrase, but like, yeah. Balance as a metaphysical concept does not apply universally. There's a lot of XYZ as a metaphysical concept doesn't apply universally. This also happens with the whole erasing concepts thing from a couple other characters, which I don't think is quite there here, but maybe. Also, meta/omni? What? Why meta? Why not just pick whichever one or the other? Also, how does controlling the balance make him indestructible, or any more indestructible than he already is? To be honest, a lot of these abilities I'm just fine with, if not for the bloat and the weird redundancies. Like, the idea of laws of physics manipulation, sure. If he wasn't omnipotent, I would suggest that applied to a specific set of universes, but he is omnipotent, so he can just do it already, so... Okay, first of all, that is so far from what embodiment means that it's not even funny anymore. Secondly, how does lordship have to do with this? Will this give us insight into the whole king stuff from before? Is that what that means? Why is it called lordship? And what counts as a concept here anyway? From a reductivist perspective, concepts are just patterns, so like, what's actually going on? This is like straight out of an SCP article. Okay, so this is literally just the same thing as the previous ability, but with concepts and incomprehensible concepts. Like, how is it a concept if it's incomprehensible? And the poorly defined supreme scales. Also, Omni plus lol, literally 101%. So, a stratum error is when something fictional acts as if it's in the real world or whatever. Stratum errors are usually defined by the confusion between meta time, which is the time that happens in the real world, versus the time that happens in the fiction. Basically conflating the fictional chronology of a project for its actual development timeline. This is relevant because this pair of abilities, which I've combined together because they're basically the same, basically makes a stratum error by saying that King Godverse could delete concepts from fiction, and that this affects the in-universe character's ability to reincarnate. Which, that's not how fiction works. That's not how fiction works at all. How do you even measure intelligence in a way that could yield a result of high omnitransient infinity and high omni-eternal infinity? Like, just say unlimited. It's not that hard, just say unlimited. Just go with what you were doing before the previous abilities and say truly no limit, but there's an adjective for that. It's called unlimited. Use the word unlimited instead of high omnitransient infinity. Like, look, you even do it right here, and this is a Pogger's ability. It's a great ability. You could have made that the entire ability set, and the character would have been a million times better. So now that I know what the word unlimited means, why don't you use it more? And like, unlimited is a good word for this, because it doesn't really have the same connotations that omni or infinity does. And so it's actually just easier to present while technically, semantically meaning something very similar. So this is almost as weirdly specific as the Mighty Scepter from before. Like, why have such a weirdly specific ability? This is like a subset of like 37 different abilities listed. Like, what even are the chains used for? It says they have excellent strength, but what entity? What entity is being targeted? And what? pull everything. Well, what? They're chains. What does this even mean? And why does King Godverse have this as a specified attack instead of it just being a part of his Omni whatever or whatever? And also, I haven't brought this up, but why are all the more specific abilities usually so combat-oriented? Where's the hyper-specific ability that allows him to conjure up a sandwich out of thin air? It's always like, he can destroy 37 planets and kill an unkillable being. For frick's sake! Why would he be dependent on anyone? King Godverse shares this ability with fricking JW, which itself is kind of a problem because supposedly avatars are too powerful for every fictional character. Are these physical laws or societal laws? I'd hope there's physical laws, but judging by the more recent Godverse's frickin' formal events thing, I feel like they might be societal laws. And the fact that he has a position of authority here is an ability for some reason? Okay. Also, why would an omnipresent being be able to detect someone with flawless stealth? Just generalize this to mind warping. I feel like this was very early on because they're leading way into the king aesthetic here, as opposed to the just generic OP bullshit aesthetic. Okay, wait, so he can summon non-gods if he wants? Why is the ability called God Summon then? Also, I technically don't need to ask what the definition of God is here, but I'm still going to anyway. So, what does God mean in this context? It can't be a generic powerful being since we've already established that's godity, so what is it? Ah yes, so now we get to 0, 0, 0, 0, not, 0. Why is this ability called 0 spelled with a 0 in place of the O? I don't know, but let's look at what the ability actually does. Okay, so King Godverse can revert something. By the example given, this appears to mean that it would transform something into what it was earlier in time. Like, for example, it would turn 100 back into Samson, or Error 404 back into William's earlier form. What doesn't make sense then is why this ability straight up just asserts that all these characters in the entire fandom community are alternate timeline versions of Undertale characters. Like, what does JW get reverted to? Betty Noir? Heck, TS Underswap isn't an alternate timeline of Undertale, so according to the example given, TS Underswap Asgore shouldn't be reverted to anything at all. But apparently it reverts to Asgore for some reason. Like, what is the logic with this ability? King Godverse uses... There are characters in modern Godverse that this ability wouldn't work on. And also, for some reason, it's a button. I mean, I guess maybe that justifies the name, which I was going to comment on being a thing where it's taking the abilities as a sort of prescriptive and not descriptive in a sense. But come on, why did it need to be a button? So also, what the heck is a rebirth here, and how does aging something up make it feel like that? And how does he make stuff useless? That's such a weird idea. Oh yeah, your right hand? That's useless now. No, don't high-five your friend with it. It's supposed to be useless. Don't punch people. It's supposed to be useless. Gosh darn it, why aren't you cooperating? This ability is as poorly defined as you can get. Also, what the heck is this ability? It feels like they're trying to meet a word count for an essay. It could be summarized in like a one sentence. Apparently he's also both a limitless being and infinitely superior to a limitless being. Also, weird superlative statements again! Also, here's the one sentence summary just for clarity. First of all, the usage of the term free will here is possibly ambiguous. So, what if beings returning to life don't have eyes? This may seem like a niche case, but there are actually characters that don't have eyes in Undertale. Or they have less than 2 eyes, though what happens there is a little more of a matter of being pedantic than anything. For example, a scenario where an asomatic being dies and is revived, what happens then? Also, why would King Godverse make slaves? He's already later present and possibly polysomatic, what? Assuming that given the free will thing at the end, that these slaves are like puppets controlled by King Godverse, why? Oh, and now it takes the person themselves dying? Previously, I thought it took them planning an assassination, and before that, I thought it took mentioning them in the page to compare power levels. You know, at this point I kind of want to make a TBGF game where you have to beat super overpowered characters, but the way you beat them isn't by overpowering them, it's pointing out stupid things with their ability sets. Maybe I've just spent too much time on the higher space form, but I don't really see how being higher dimensional translates to an inherent power advantage. Also, why is this like the 30th measure against King Godverse being destroyed or killed? You can just say he's unkillable and leave it at that. That isn't such an unreasonable property for a character to have. Oh wow, this is just the same ability as the OP God 404 version, which makes it an explicit case of a character explicitly having another character's ability, which is kind of rare in Godverse. As such, because it's the OP God 404 version, all of my complaints from that video apply to this ability as well. Mainly, what the heck counts as magic here? Lightning round! What this, actually does is unclear. This is just reality manipulation again, but with another mention of the depth of all existence, which is poorly defined. No, he doesn't. Why does the author claim that he does? And okay, sure, fine, but why is this described in terms of combat alone? Surely precision is useful for other things than hitting attacks precisely. Greatest evil and greatest good according to what morality? And before his own. Also, you can't be both the greatest good and the greatest evil at the same time unless you're the only person in existence. And what the heck does boundary mean here? So, this ability has the issue of sticking quantum in front of things to make it sound advanced. Okay, that's not entirely true, because it does relatively accurately describe what quantum physics is. Quantum telekinesis is the advanced part. And there goes the author's favorite phrase, in short, again. At least this time the in short section is shorter than the actual description, if only barely. Also, is this really the absolute or infinite version of mental manipulation? It just seems like a moderately powerful mental manipulation. Needs more ultra meta omni in the ability description to be the absolute and infinite version. And also, what is this character's obsession with slaves, which I now confirm are like puppets in this manner? Why? Why in any universe would a character like that need to have that? Again, what does transcend mean? And oh, this is a biggie, a rarity this late into the ability list. Let's step through this paragraph by paragraph. So firstly, what is transcendent matter, and how does this ability work in specifically meta/omni levels? We've seen meta/omni before, haven't we? Yeah. What does meta mean in this context? And again with the omni, just say unlimited. Of course, in the next paragraph, it just goes on to list all the different types of matter that he can manipulate. Which is frankly unnecessary in this context, because again, he already has reality manipulation and quantum manipulation, so why does he need to specify here? And again, he already says he can manipulate matter, so why specify all these different categories? And this has even less reason to be specified separately. Ah yes, he can create matter from alternate timelines. Ah yes, he's an outcode. We did need to specify this. And first of all, this should just be in quantum manipulation, and second of all, what is this at their strongest thing? This is just what you can do. How is this at their strongest? So now for this ability, where we're going to play another game of, does this ability actually work? We don't need to write it in a page this time, so I'm not getting out my journal, but just, let's start! JW King Godverse is an alternative version of King Godverse with all abilities +1, and is not a slave of OG King Godverse. JW King Godverse is still an alternative version of King Godverse with all abilities +1, and is still not a slave of OG King Godverse. And while I'm at it, here's some things for Undertale. So the Undertale encounter story scene is replaced with like an interactive, like not interactive, but like a cutscene, like those in Undertale Yellow and those, and like the True Pacifist cutscene in Undertale. So nope, this ability just straight up doesn't work. Like, what are these abilities that just straight up don't work, and I can demonstrate that they don't work, literally just in this video? Also, there's more copy pasta here, but whatever. And this one's even more stupid because of the creator will not be able to access fiction bit. Like, what? How does that even... How is the author saying that's supposed to work? King Godverse definitely manipulated me into making this video with how ass his abilities are. Jokes aside, and we'll get to jokes aside later, what if everything perceived by King Godverse is a vector, why not just call this reality manipulation? Lol, the beyond. It's almost as cringy as the glitch from that other video. Here we get to the core, what I believe to summarize the core problem with this kind of power scaling. Omnipotent level. More generally, the abstraction of descriptors like this, and really this is more just the otherwise problem, to just abstract power levels, which people can exceed, and whatnot. Okay, but why is it a scream? Why is it a scream? And why does it say, it's impossible to survive this, and then later on contradict itself with, your fate depends on King Godverse? That's a little sus, don't you think? And just for a fun comparison, assuming you're watching this video in one sitting, if King Godverse started this scream when you started watching the video, he wouldn't finish it by this point, because it's only been 54 minutes. That's a long time to be screaming for. And here we get exist or doesn't exist again, but also it's nice to have some actual creation-based abilities. With how destruction-oriented a lot of ability lists are, I tend to just interpolate creation on analogous scales, but here it actually explicitly specifies it, so that's nice. Though the idea of destroying concepts is a little funky. This is actually a scenario where reductivist analysis of concepts actually comes in handy. Okay. Highest consumer, hands of kill. Wait. Hold on, let's look at how this interacts with some of King Godverse's other abilities. So it says here can create a limited number of copies. I assume this means of King Godverse. And in that case, by the true copy principle, he's just as much a copy of these King Godverses as they are copies of him. And so when we apply this ability, it means that all King Godverse versions have their free will stripped and powers stripped simultaneously if he ever uses this ability. He literally just has a way to permanently disable himself. Which is just... the fact that I could find this is just funny. Like, bro, why can Godverse do that? You already know my problem with the hands. A, they're very hyper-specific for King Godverse. And B, Gaster's hands are poorly defined and probably don't even exist. So moving on to the next ability, which A is just Transcendent Bull. But B, why is presence in square brackets? Why that particularly word? And why do Omniverse abilities affect him? Why not just be immune to all abilities? Because that's clearly what you're going for. Rare instance of King Godverse actually having a limit to his power? Other than the stratum error here, at least non-existence seems to be used correctly here. Unlike the Infinity Code pages reached out of the prison of non-existence crap. Nope, not true. I decided to include that thing in Altertale. King Godverse didn't. Why include an ability when the scenario it applies to doesn't even happen? You've established like 37 times over that he's unkillable, so why have this extra thing? King Godverse shares this ability with SCP-076. King Godverse shares this ability with SCP-073. No, he can't. I've gone over this before. Also, what? He can watch fiction just like a creator. Literally, Bixby can do this, so this isn't the flex you think it is. And like, so can Natalie, Darren, Sophia, Marianne, Frankie, all of the literally normal-ass people from my setting. So I feel like what Godverse creators fail to understand about death here is that it just isn't a thing that applies to all beings. The same way eating or sleeping doesn't apply to all beings. And sure, death can be generalized a bit more than those two, but this ability just fails to acknowledge beings that are honest-to-God unkillable. The same way that if this sub-ability said this, it would raise questions about beings that are unable to or don't have a way to eat stuff. And you blew the non-existence thing. You were doing so good with the use of non-existence in that previous ability. Okay, this probably isn't the intent. The author was probably just listing random things that vaguely had to do with this. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. In that case, is this ability implying that normal people can't interact with non-corporeal beings? Like, for a lot of definitions of interact, that's frequently not true. Yes, we get it already. Move on. Though actually, what does authority mean? But still, move on. And remember that this ability allows thing I talked about earlier? Well, this is it. Because it specifies that the ability is called duality. So this is also an example of the related phenomenon of prescriptive abilities, which I also brought up before. Basically what this is, instead of treating this like a description of King Godverse's abilities, it treats it like some kind of actual in-universe construct or something that allows him to do the thing specified. Also, blue is opposite yellow, not orange, though I won't blame the author for this since the RYB color model is pretty prevalent. Just wanted to point that out. And again with the combat-focused descriptions. Why? There are so many much more useful things he could use this ability for. So why do you choose to deflect it at what? Also here, this kind of ability is funny. It's the self-referential time ability that's technically ambiguous, but no it isn't. You know exactly what the author means by this. And what does manipulating infinity actually do? All these words individually make sense, but put together I can't understand a thing. King Godverse shared this ability with all of Undersided and any character whose universe doesn't inherently follow a narrative. A. Pain applies to even fewer beings than death does. B. This assumes all beings are biological when most major characters in Undertale aren't. And C. Even where pain does apply, it usually doesn't work like that. Joke abilities here are poorly defined, and it's clear that this is more just power scaling centric weirdness, so that he can win against RSS or whatever. I don't know. And here we are, the final ability. It took us an hour to get here, and almost poetically, it's a form of explicit Polychism or Polysomatism, the variability that I've been confused about being missing from a lot of previous power lists. Though, why would Polysomatism be confused with author avatars? Is that like the default meaning of avatar in Godverse? I'd assume based on previous usage of it that it is, but that has other words for it. A polysomatic avatar really kinda doesn't. And not to mention, context is everything. Even if you didn't specify, it wouldn't be confused with it anyway, because why would a character create author avatars? But, phew, we're finally done with this. Right? Right? Oh, for frick's sake.